Well, it ties into what you're talking about around telling stories. And it ties into this multi-level human acceptance of, for example, transformation as a concept, as something that's worth doing. So you've got the Dragon's Den stage where you've got to convince the paymasters that this is something worth investing in. You've got to convince your team, your colleagues to buy into it. You've got to convince technology providers to work with you in the right way, perhaps. But more importantly, within the organisation, you've got to convince stakeholders and your colleagues and other people involved. Finance may be involved in the process. For example, for us on the services procurement side of things, we're dealing with complex services categories. When it comes down to invoicing, our system can produce those invoices off the back of a milestone in a statement of work, but they need to interface really easily with finance because finance don't want to change. So part of that narrative is to finance, you're not going to have to change anything. You're not even necessarily going to have to adopt any new systems. It's going to work really easily for you, but it's all around the story of why this is worthwhile for every different person along the way. So, do you think procurement teams typically communicate well within organisations?
No, but I don't think organisations typically communicate, or functions typically communicate well. It's a big question, isn't it? I think I've seen a lot of transformations or procurement leaders talk a lot over the last 5 to 10 years about the brand of procurement and needing to sell procurement and all of that. I think when I shifted into sort of, or took on marketing as part of what I did, I think and started working with professional marketeers, it really opened my eyes to actually what happens upstream from sales and that concept of creating a brand, understanding your customers, that sort of customer-centric approach that we then rebadged as customer-centric procurement about 5 or 6 years ago, because ultimately procurement is for its customers, in the same way as stories are for the audience, or presentations are for the people in the room, not for the person who's giving it. And honestly, when you ask that question, I can see 3 or 4 different paths that we could talk about, which are all super interesting. But I'm going to talk about robot vacuum cleaners. Have you got a robot vacuum cleaner?
No. But again, you've got my attention.
Yeah, I came home one night after some sort of evening out, and I got home at around about midnight, and I walked into the kitchen, and there's this box, and I thought, oh, look, there's a box. This looks really exciting because it's quite a big box. And then I opened up the big box, and then there was another box inside.
Even better.
And it said on it, robot vacuum cleaner. And I thought, that's a bit odd. I never knew I wanted a robot vacuum cleaner, but there's one in my kitchen. And so I went out to bed, and I sort of nudged Mrs. Jill, who didn't thank me for nudging her, in quite industrial language. And I said, there's a robot vacuum cleaner downstairs. And she said, I know. And that was it. And so
I know, I ordered it.
Yeah, no. Anyway, bizarrely, it was a gift from some friends for something we did for them.
Oh, right.
That's a heck of a gift, right? But anyway, so robot vacuum cleaners. The robot vacuum cleaner, or the big one in the US, the Roomba. And they did a focus group, essentially of customers saying, well, how would you like to improve the Roomba? And they said, well, we'd like it to be more powerful, a bit faster, a bit quieter. Something like that. And so the engineers go away and they figure out, well, how can we put more power in? Longer battery life, I think that was it, bit faster, et cetera, et cetera. And so they reconfigure it, re-engineer it, and they come back with this thing which is faster, more powerful, and longer battery life. In doing that, they took out some features, and one of the features they took out was a little voice that, when it bumped into things, it went, ooh! But they thought, well, that doesn't matter, because people want it faster, more battery, blah, blah, blah. And they redid the focus groups, and actually satisfaction went down. Why? Because people quite liked it.
Yeah.
Because the irrational side of them, the logical side would have gone, well, it's only a robot vacuum cleaner. It doesn't matter. Look at it now. It's better. I get a better clean. It's faster, quieter, longer battery life, blah, blah, blah. But actually they're sat there going, well, I quite like that. And actually I named it. We've named ours, by the way. It's called Barry. And, that emotional side of it, you can't get away from the fact that human beings are irrational creatures. And actually, a study that we cottoned onto by the Lindstrom Foundation, which is sort of a brand marketing foundation, bit divisive, but essentially they said that 85% of human decisions are based on emotion rather than logic. We live in a world where procurement tries to sort of force the logic. And so it's tempting to go in with logical arguments every time, but people are looking for that emotional element in their sort of stories, their decision making, etc., etc.
I suppose especially, sorry to interrupt you there, but especially if your world is, 90% logic based information coming your way, then maybe that emotional side of for people in that situation is understimulated, and it therefore has a higher percentage value.
Yeah, and I did a presentation on this about 5 or 6 years ago, and we called it faster horses, because there's that quote of Henry Ford. If I asked people what they wanted, they'd say faster horses. If you went into procurement's got all these customers, and we always talk about procurement, the procurement service touching everyone in the business. So everyone in the business is your customer. Forget about end customers for a second.
Yeah.
End customers. If you went and asked all those people what they wanted from procurement, which is an important thing to do, you're probably going to get back a faster horses scenario where they'll go, well, I'd like it to be a bit easier, a bit faster, but kind of the same. So you're then being defined by their view of what procurement should be. But I think you can shoot for a bit more. I think you can try and figure out, if you're going to design a world-leading function, if you're going to make a transformation that inspires and goes beyond what people thought was possible, you've got to get further. You've got to understand, well, what's their objectives? What do they worry about? What can procurement do that they don't think it can do today? Because I do think that sometimes we're only. If you ask the question, what do you want from procurement, you're always going to be defined by what that person thinks that procurement can do.